Hello everyone, Caillou back for another Moxtober daily review video. Though I've kind of given lie to the daily part of that, decided to take a break over the weekend, just chill out, catch up, do some other stuff. But uh, it's now that I've taken a little bit of a break, I'm ready to continue, and we're gonna pick up where I left off on day six, Forest. Um, quick reminders. You can find the MSC set file with all the cards we talk about today and more in the description. You can find the list to all 31 prompts for each of the days of the month in the description. And finally, you can find out how to submit your own cards to the shared files by joining the Beacon Creation server or the Custom Magic server, both of which are linked in the description. Um, and it's pretty fitting that even though it's not a new week in terms of like Moxtober videos, but it is a new quote unquote work week for making these videos, and so I think it's pretty appropriate that I've got my first guest on back from the start of last week and the start of Moxtober as a whole. Welcome back, Juliet.
Hello! Happy to be here.
I'm excited to miss many more pop culture references, and uh, I think that I want to pick your brain about today's prompt for a second because I think it's one of those prompts where it can it for me it's the kind of prompt that annoys me, right? I'm like, I see it and it's like that's a word that means a game object. Now I'm locked into thinking about that game object. Darn. But I also am like interested in seeing how people like play off of that and uh sort of like subvert that expectation or that the easy route, quote unquote, to go with designing for this. So this definitely feels like one of the more thorny prompts in that sense. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, one of the things is, as last time I was on with autumn, the theme that was presented for this whole month of prompts was autumn. And so trying to find words and ideas that were submitted, that were recommended, that people, were interested in, and that fit the idea of autumn and that fit the theme of autumn. We've got a few words kind of together. We've got orchard, we've got leaves, we've got autumn, we've got forest. There's some overlaps here. And so I think the specificity of forest actually works in its favor, given its adjacency to some of these other conceptual ideas. Does that make sense? So, like, if you want to do something that's about a big group of trees, you can do that during the orchard prompt. But if you want to do something about the game object that is forest, you've got this prompt. Does that make sense? That, like, sometimes
Yeah,
you want to
yeah,
tell a story about a big group of trees, but it isn't about game object basic land type forest.
yeah. That makes sense, and I think that it definitely points to sort of prompts that appeal to the various quote unquote psychographics of MTG players almost like God, what is the because there's different like aesthetic profiles, right? Like there's flavor, there's lore, and then there's sort of like a mechanical aesthetic cleanliness one, and I feel like this is the type of prompt that appeals to like the mechanical aesthetic cleanliness psychographic. But I
Is
mean,
that what Mel is, or is that like a subset or different axes than like Mel?
I'm
Who
not
knows?
I'm
These
not
are
sure.
all made up names for made up psychographics, and like the idea that psychographics are anything is like it's slightly spurious to begin with, but potentially a useful type of spurious.
Yeah, yeah.
Nevertheless, we have forests here, and I think there was one of the many other ideas was every word of the month being something that has a magic meaning and an outside of magic meaning. You know what I mean? I and it's hearing your feedback on this prompt. I'm glad we didn't go with that particular thing for this particular year.
I mean, I do think that it is a very much a me thing, right? Where there is like a feeling of what do you call it? Uh, maybe not having to like, yeah, it is just like a me thing where like I very much work off of like art and flavor. And so when I feel like I'm kind of wrote into like, okay, here is a mechanical thing. I'm like, no, not the mechanical thing. But for other people, it's going to be like, okay, I have a mechanical hook, and then I can blossom this out into whatever kind of story I want to tell. So, I think it could. I think that could have been an interesting thing to do, and especially when it's like, I think that like forest is a little bit like, how do I put this? It's a little bit direct of a one, right? Because it's like it's such like a atomic portion of the game, if that makes sense. But uh, I can definitely see like other like game meaning stuff coming up and having like a little more like play for people even like me who are sort of like yeah mechanics, if that makes sense. But yeah, okay.
Sure.
Lots of musings on the subject. Let's get to the actual practicalities and see what people actually made based on
Our
this.
first card is Zagoth Damp Thicket, designed by Larcent. It's an uncommon land forest with Zagoth Damp Thicket enters the battlefield tapped and tap. Add green. Whenever this mana is used to cast a blue and or black creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with a trample counter.
Yeah, I kind of like this. I know Larson early. I don't know if Larson's literally designing a land every day, but I know that for a previous prompt they did a similar thing of like, uh, it was a blue black tap land that when you spent mana to cast a spell or activate an ability from your graveyard, it would like, uh, it would do a thing. So this feels like in a similar territory where it's encouraging you to perhaps diversify your mana base in a specific way so that you can get some interesting upsides. Um, and this is obviously pointing to Zagoth, the I guess you can't call it a shard, but Zagoth, the
I
faction from
Mhm,
Ikoria.
mhm. I
I
think the through line, if I'm not mistaken, for Larcent, you're picking up on a through line, but I think the through line is actually different from the one that you're picking up, which is I believe Larcent's thing is every card for this whole Moxtober is going to be for a particular blue black archetype, but potentially for a different like what's a different examination of a blue black archetype, throughout the whole month. And so this is
okay.
what if a blue black project, but in a foresty way, right? And I think locating this within Zagoth kind of helps give some directive. Okay, we got the trample counter because we got keyword counters. Trample also in particular is very big monster e. Zagoth literally the place, on Ikaria and everything. I think the different parts of this package work together for me, and it does tickle me that this is a blue black forest card.
Yeah, I think that my one thought on it, or like not one thought, because I had lots of good thoughts, but like my one like apprehension is that blue and black creatures, though not universally, tend to be sort of like the most evasive creatures in Magic in general. And so while giving a trample counter isn't necessarily bad, I wonder if like uh, it's potentially less impactful than say like even if as a keyword counter it's not like even if it isn't a keyword counter, I think just like a plus one counter to like offset the weakness that of like blue and black creatures that they tend to be smaller, but then they give you good utility and evasion. Um, it less hits in on the Ikoria part of it, but it feels like big creature is such a green thing, and it helps like marry the two like I guess color
Mhm.
packages going on here. So that would be my thought. And yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
this is like
I
I
think
don't think
that
this is
makes
like a
sense.
bad thing at all. I'm just like it comes down a lot to like numbers in a specific environment and how often like the trample is going to be like relevant, which I think it's probably relevant like a decent amount of time, but will it be as relevant slash like synergistic as a plus one counter? Is just the first thought that came to my head.
Great. The next card is Orc's Blood Forest. It's a uncommon land forest with the forest ability, tap add green. Orc's Blood Forest enters the battlefield tapped, and tap, sacrifice an orc, add 3 mana in any combination of red and or green. This one's designed by Gluestick248.
The lumber's coming back for the lumber's coming back and it's jacked, basically.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Last time I was on, I talked about Orcish Lumberjack with our, I think it was the Wolf Elemental Evoke Spirit. And here we have an inverse of Orcish Lumberjack, and isn't that exciting?
I like that it inherently has the forest type, so this isn't just like there is a base case of like cool, it's just a ETB tapped forest, and you're cool with that. Um, and I think that this is the sort of like this is a fun reference, and I think that like yeah, okay, it's a land that gives you fast mana, ooh, scary, but also orc is not exactly like a common like type in Magic, less so at like cheap costs.
Or rather, that was true. That was significantly more true a year ago
Okay, yeah,
than
okay,
it
okay.
is
Like,
today.
yeah. Actually, I should check my LTR before I say that. But again, like the most common orc is in black, so it isn't this color,
Mhm.
right? So the but yeah,
And no one's ever played a red, green, black deck before. Like that's.
look, come on, I am trying.
Uh-huh. I think you're right. Black is not historically the most common Applejack's color, for sure. Because Applejuns isn't really a good. That doesn't roll off the tongue, I don't think.
Yeah, but like yeah, overall, I think that like this feels both exciting, cheeky, and reasonably balanced.
Mhm. The next card is designed by Two Draft Two Dude. It's Mycelium Spore Grounds. It's a rare land swamp forest, so it has the swamp forest abilities. And Mycelium Spore Grounds enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a fungus creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on target fungus you control.
Let's go, fungus mention. I feel like this is the fungi are like such a sad like type in the sense of like they're just like they have like this unique mechanical space that I think has like a lot of promise to it, but they're just so slow usually. So every time I see like additional support for them, I'm like, yay, let's go. It, it especially because like I think fungi in like modern design times have emphatically moved past the spore counter thing, usually for the better. Like it just general go wide stuff now, but I do like just like a little bit of this parasitic theme as a treat.
This card to me totally could have been printed in like Future Sight, right? This who doesn't love thalids? Who doesn't love a thalid land? As you say, this isn't really. It feels like I'm breaking, I'm sequence breaking and everything. It's like you're catching up to the rate that other tribes get their card advantage at. So I think you're probably fine. I suppose if you've got 4 of these out, you can really churn through some things, but like I don't know. I think we're allowed to say 2 thumbs up to the fungus deck. You get your extra. You get your bonus.
Yeah, yeah. If you get a bunch of copies of this out, like you've earned it. You've spent years languishing in non-sentient sadness. Um, and also speaking of future sight, that reminded me of Telon of Havenwood, who is the future
Mm-hmm.
sight Thalid slash or sorry fungus guy. Um, and I think this is the one that made me realize that spore counters were a theme back in the old day when I mostly played Commander. Um, Me and a group of friends were looking to make like decks based using commanders that were sort of like underplayed and sort of intentionally bad, and this was one of the options I looked at, and I kind of fell in love with fungi as a result. I ended up buying a absolutely awful arcane mill deck with Cloudhoof Kieran instead, but I still have the Telon of Havenwood deck somewhere on tapped out.
You know, Future Sight really did a lot for a lot of weird little mechanics, a lot of weird little cards, a lot of weird little flavors. Time Spiral Block as a whole, kind of a high water point, or I suppose a less a high water point and more just a precedent for where modern Magic would end up being, where we get a commander product, and here you get the legends that do the thing, and then have this kind of niche sort of effect.
Yeah, and I think that there are still products which I think like honestly, I think that like even like what do you call it? Like the most recent Doctor Who Commander stuff. It really isn't like my cup of tea. It very much feels like this a similar deal as like I imagine Time Spiral Block was, where it's just like there's all this crazy stuff, and it's very much like doing things that we know the enfranchised players will like salivate over, and it's like okay, yeah, then I see you.
Just this morning, I saw multiple people very excited on co-host about the new Doctor Who like doctors together in their little TARDIS frames and everything. It's nice. Our next card is Foe of the Forest, designed by Just Nigel. It's 2 red and a red for a legendary enchantment background. And it has commander creatures you own have 1 and a red tap, destroy target land. Its controller creates a Reaper token. And Reaper tokens are a cool token that Just Nigel's been working with. The Reaper token has it's an artifact with tap, pay 3 life, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 colorless mana. So it's an inverse of a food token. Instead of paying to generic mana and getting 3 positive life out of the bargain, you're paying 3 life and getting 2 bonus mana out of the bargain.
Yeah, I like the idea of Reaper tokens. I think it's like you have to be careful with them, but I think that in the right environment, you can make it like an environment where like life totals are pressured heavily enough that like the mana advantage uh, and isn't an issue even at lower cost production and in multiples. So you can like force people to actually consider how much they're losing to their Reaper tokens. Um, the specific design, I'm like, I think that my mantra for commanders has always been like you want them to be like build aroundable and not just kind of have like generic effects. And I think that like we've moved into an era where like we're seeing a lot more uncommon legends that are a lot more meant for like maybe potentially draft or constructed applications where like there's less impetus on legendary creatures that they need to build around. This being a background though, I think that it's sort of just being like it's not because it's not like a pox or like uh what do you call like general land destruction strategy deck. It's not really that because you're refunding the mana anyways, and it's so slow and it's commander. Um, yeah, yeah. It just feels like a low impact background if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely don't think this is going to be, oh, this is the cool Ponza, like super effective card or anything. Especially because it isn't really depriving your opponents of mana, and it's kind of a weird, it's not very efficient ramp if you're trying to do it for your own self. But I'm pro people designing more backgrounds. I think that's a fun space that I don't see very often. I think this is a fun sort of token. I think this is a fair cost for this effect. If somebody's like, I really want to destroy lands, it's like, okay, sure, here, destroy as many lands as you want to at this cost, and you won't be like ruining other people's games. I don't know, the combination of those things together make this charming to me, if not like I want to play this card. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Even if like yeah, I'm obviously on a different page, but we're reading from the same book.
Mhm. Our next card is Enchanted Forest. It's designed by Oppo0895. It's an enchantment land forest. Uncommon.
What's our next card? No, okay. This is. I'm gonna say it. I usually am like trying to find the silver lining to a card. I kind of just this just kind of feels like there's there's not, it doesn't feel like I'm just like, why? Like it's enchantment lands and artifact lands. At least give them some interesting play to them, or like something that makes them feel more like an enchant, like their type, or like a drawback, obviously, because this is just like potentially strictly better basic in the decks that like care about enchantments. There's room for flavor text. You could have put some cool flavor text in here. There's also no artist credit, which is a pretty big deal to me.
Ooh,
Uh,
sorry, I missed that.
yeah, no, I put that more on the designer here. Overall, this is not, it's not impressing me.
Okay. I just thought, well, we had artifact lands. What if they're enchantment lands? But I I can get that this is a less splashy than Tree of Tales was when it was first printed.
Yeah, and I think that like we've seen like what impact artifact lines can potentially have on formats, and like
Hmm.
MH2 printed like like because the tap lands came in and they had like, because they entered tapped and they had like a drawback to them in that sense. They created interesting play and deck building decisions, but I mean, I think that like yeah, when you this sort of lands in a weird spot for me, because it's like, okay, technically you're opening it, like there is a drawback, right? Because you're opening yourself up to more forms of removal. But I feel like yeah, there's a question of like, okay, if that drawback exists, there needs to be a good reason to run this card, and that's usually going to be enchantment synergies. And I think that because of like how much it polarizes the game state in that sense, where it's like you either get a free way to proximate your enchantment synergies, or you turn your opponent's like sideboard hate into land destruction. It feels like there's kind of like a butting heads there, which is why I liked also the MH2 lands, because they took a cue from Darksteel whatever Citadel and then gave them all indestructible. So it felt like it had like a little bit of pulling it towards the middle case. Yeah.
Hmm. Our next card is Enshrined Grove. Also has a backside. This is designed by Mark Confidant. Enshrined Grove is a rare land forest, the normal forest ability, and as Enshrined Grove enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. But it also has an ability, Glamour. You may enchant this as though it were a creature. As long as it's enchanted, it's transformed. And then its backside says, Shrine Wanderer, land creature forest elk spirit. It has the normal forest tap, add green, and trample. And when this transforms into Shrine Wanderer, you gain 3 life, and it's a 3/3. So it's a Shockland forest on the front side. Have to pay 2 life to make it a basic forest. But then as long as you've got an enchantment, sort of aura around of any sort, an enchant creature, an enchant permanent, an enchant any sort of thing, you can enchant this, and then it becomes a creature, and you get the 3 life back. So you get a reward even if you paid the 2 life on the front. And you get a 3/3 trampler. You get a little elk in the bargain.
Yeah, this is the type of card where I'm like, this is neat, but I'm also like I think that yeah, I think like this is one of those things where like I like the mechanic, I like the card. I'm just like, which environment? I like not even, and I don't even think that's like again, this is not a ding against a card. I'm just like wrapping my head around the kind of environment that would invite glamour to be like a play like like a mechanic that you want in depth, it's really intriguing to me because we've had like equipment sets before. I don't think we've really had like aura sets before, unless I'm misremembering.
I mean, like Ravnica, uh,
Mm,
uh, Theros, obviously,
mm.
original Theros
Oh, actually,
block.
yeah. Okay, you know what?
Um,
Bestow is kind of the aura mechanic. Okay, that makes sense. Um, but yeah,
Ravnica had more auras than you remember. Like that's one of those. Ravnica had way more spirits and way more auras than anybody, um, particularly remembers because
yeah, and like
it was
I
adjacent to Kamigawa, so they put a lot of spirits in, and I guess it was connected to the plot, kind of, but that might be kind of a contrivance. And because they had the what is it, the mage marks, the guild
yeah,
marks,
yeah,
sort of things.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think that this is interesting in a way because like bestow is sort of like a way to increase enchantment density while still allowing for creature slots. While this feels sort of like a different way of caring about auras, where it's like you really want to up the aura density in your deck, which could also be done through bestow, but it places a different set of like bestow is an enabler, while this is sort of like guzzling or like asking for additional support. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like it intrigues me is where I fall. Like I don't like it's hard to like evaluate one way or another without seeing the environment around it, but making me curious about the environment I think is already doing its job.
Mhm. With many DFCs, I look at them and go, so what parts of this could we change to make this a single-faced card? And I think Glamour could get there. You would just lose the when this transforms into like the kind of like pseudo ETB ability because we could fit as long as it's enchanted, it's a 3/3 elk creature with trample. You know, like that we could fit on the front text potentially.
Yeah, I believe it. I just kind of I do like it as a DFC just for like giving stuff room to breathe and potentially giving more design space as a result. Like
Mhm.
like rules wise, maybe a little messier. And I do agree that like having it a little tighter can sometimes be good, but this definitely feels like the type of mechanic where there's enough going on that it's better to split it up between two cards, especially because like this feels like on the simpler end of what glamour cards could do. But if you wanted to get
Mhm.
into wacky hijinks, putting like you yeah yeah you get what I mean. The people get what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm. Our next card is, I think, maybe my favorite or one of my favorites, and I'm really curious if you can guess why. It's Canopy Collar, designed by Dragon of the West. It's one green and a green for a mythic rare creature elf shaman 01. It has when Canopy Collar enters the battlefield, target forest you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with trample that's still a land. Whenever one or more lands you control attack, untap all lands you control.
Huh. Oh, that's I don't know why this is one of your favorite cards specifically, but this is very intriguing. I do like that it's like secretly a 4 drop in some like you can play it as a 3 drop, but you ideally want to play this on turn 4, swing with the forest, and then immediately use the mana advantage to drop a 4 drop, or drop a 3 drop and still have your 4/4 up. Um, and it's almost like an enchantment that is a creature because you're
Mhm.
not attacking with this. You can technically block with it, but usually you want to keep it around to function as a wilderness wreck. Yeah.
Mhm. So, this card I think is one of my favorites for the specific theme of today, which is what's the word of the day?
Forest.
And I think this is, of all the submissions that I've seen, the forest card that I've seen today. It's
God
it's
damn it!
the most four card.
I even walked into it by being like, oh yeah, this is more of a 4 drop than a 3 drop. No.
It's the forest, like hyphen est. Um, it's a 4/4. Everything that you just said exactly. Yeah. It's a fun card.
Yeah, I'm honestly gratified by like the amount of like slightly out there designs we're getting today. It really feels
Mhm.
like contrary to me where like my like I hear forest and then I get stuck, right? I'm like, "Oh, forest." It feels like people heard forest and they're like, "Oh, forest." There's lots of things you can do with forest. Like that's so simple that it means that you can do anything with it. And I kind of do love that.
Mhm. I have another card that I'd love to get your point of view on, which is Swallowed by Roots. It's designed by M Troop 66. It's one and a green for an enchantment aura, uncommon. It has kicker, white mana, enchant forest you control, and when this enters the battlefield, O-ring an artifact or enchantment until this leaves the battlefield. If the spell was kicked, exile target permanent until this leaves the battlefield instead. So for one and a green, you get this enchantment that it's an aura, so it's enchanting forest. You have to have a forest out, but it's also like one and a green. So you can O-ring an artifact or enchantment, or you can spend white, so it'd be one green and a white to O-ring a permanent.
Spicy. Okay, so this is like chained to the rocks
Mhm.
in like in 2023. Um okay. So ultimately I think the biggest question here is permanent versus non-land permanent. Like do you want this to be able to have a stone rain mode? My gut is it's probably safer not to. If this was a cube design, I would be tempted to just leave it at permanent. I think outside of cube, you're likely safer, like just play pattern wise, to put an online permanent. It's already like a flexible and fun card with lots of play. You don't need it to sometimes randomly screw people over, right? Um,
Mhm.
Other than that, yeah, it's just neat. I love these like off color kickers that marry things that each color can do. Um, and like this one, it's taking a green effect, putting sort of like you said, like it's an O-ring, right? So it's doing green removal in a white way, and then it allows you to just full send it into just white removal in general.
Mhm.
It's clever, but not in the pejorative sense that sometimes that term is used. It's genuinely just neat and smart.
Sure. Sure. I I I think it's interesting to find flavor for stuff in the chain to the rock sort of space, and I think this specific iteration makes it feel much better than if this was just chained to the rocks but to a forest. If that makes sense, I think that like the fact that this is a mono green card some significant margin of the time, I think really helps me with that sort of flavor and idea.
This also made me think about. I'm interested in seeing how people end up designing cards for gnarled because I know for gnarled I've looked ahead for some of the files or just seen people submitting cards. I know someone had like a settle the wreckage esque card for gnarled with like similar flavor of like oh the roots are getting you because root I feel like gnarled is an adjective like that's like mostly applied to like roots and stuff. So makes me interested in seeing again like you mentioned there are like words that have some sort of overlap. So I'm interested in seeing if like this is space that we see make a return slash resurgence come day 10. I think that's when gnarled is, yeah.
Mhm. I'm going to share my card, which is Cultivated Crime Scene. It's 3 generic mana for an artifact clue. It has tap, add green, or the chosen color and the normal clue new ability. But the chosen part comes in that you may pay one generic mana and return a basic land you control to its owner's hand rather than pay this spell's cost. If you do, choose a color and this enters the battlefield tap. In flavor text. I think someone planted this evidence.
Wait, what's the name of the card again?
Cultivated crime scene.
Huh. Wait, I'm not seeing it in the file.
Oh, you may have downloaded an earlier version of the file.
Oh, okay. Because I see the cultivating architect, and I'm like, that has the Castmire thing on it, but that's not the card that's being read.
I swapped the cards because I I realized after doing village and forest, I was like, oh, I submitted the cards backwards. I was
Ah,
like, I gotta
okay.
fix this before we go live. So,
Yeah.
hello, listener. You
Unfortunately,
can.
sorry. Yeah, your shame is now captured live forever, immortalized in video. But yeah, sorry. I'm gonna hide this image, and could you reread the card once more, both for me and the viewers?
Yes, and I'm putting the image in our chat just in case it makes it easier to put it live. It's cultivated crime scene. It's 3 generic mana for a common artifact clue with you may pay 1 generic mana and return a basic land you control to its owner's hand rather than pay this spell's cost. If you do, choose a color and this enters the battlefield tapped. It has tap, add green or the chosen color, and 2 tap, sacrifice this, draw a card. Classic clue sort of stuff.
Gotcha.
Flavor text. I think someone planted this evidence.
Yeah, it's like a very knobbly border post, but like not knobbly just in the sense that like knobs have been turned, not that it's like rough or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a. Did the original border post require basic land or just regular land? Uh,
Hmm.
and then
I think basic land, didn't it?
yeah, I just didn't
I'll
remember.
have to double
But
check.
so it does like the thriving thing on a mana rock, but also allows you to sack it. Uh, so which makes sense for it to and the additional upside of being able to cast it for its alt cost both mean that it makes sense that this is not just straight 3 mana. Uh, what is the generic mana rock called? Manolith. So
Mm-hmm.
you only get 2 colors, but in exchange there's a lot of like you can cash it in early, you can cash it in late, which I think makes for good decision points in a contained limited like Jumpstart.
Mm-hmm. Hypothetically, you're gonna have up to 3 of these in your 40 card deck, which I think is a a risky thing to do to a mana base. But there's upside to it too. The availability of both ramp and cycling to a land, I think, kind of flips on the other side from it's ETBT, and also if you have a opening hand with 2 of these, you might need to mulligan if you don't have any actual basics with you.
I also just realized that like that is how that sounds when said aloud because I kind of just I extend enters the battlefield tapped when I read it as ETBT, but then when you say it, it sounds like itty bitty.
Now that you mention it, it does. I'm sure there's a pun to be made somewhere there.
Yeah,
So previously, when I've worked on the crime scenes have gone through a lot of different iterations, and I think in the past they were compared to the what are they the rail lines? Is that is that right? As an artifact cycle,
yeah. Though I think the rail lines are like considerably more powerful than these, and
right?
in a way that like makes me a lot higher on these because they feel like a little bit more reasonable. Yeah.
hmm I and upon the first version, and then seeing people talk about the rail lines, and then like reading the rail lines and everything, I'm like, okay, I think I can still tune this to playable, but not breaking things. The thing that I think I'm most proud of with these is I think I got the flavor pretty close to right for the idea that you have a land and then something happens there and then you have to like cordon the land off and now it's not a land anymore. Now it's a crime scene. Like that's the returning the land to your hand. Hypothetically, this should be an aura, but you know, it's weirder to have enchantment artifact clue aura as like a card type that you're casting and seeing on a card.
Yeah, it scans.
Mhm. Any other cards that
Oh,
you want
okay.
to talk about today?
Okay, it's my turn. Um, let's see. I have a lot actually. I'm gonna
Oh wow.
they and some of them are pretty simple. So I'm gonna start off with one of the simpler ones, which is Deep Forest Dwellers, designed by our very own Wobbles. Um, and this is a sorcery with no mana cost, but it's green in color. Create two 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens. It has forest cycling for green and flashback for one and a green. So, taking, I think, what would normally be some very dangerous design space, which is quote unquote zero cost sorceries, which do funky stuff with free casting, and making it into like a really neat, cool reference to like, what is it? Is it Call of the Wild? That's the green flashback, one green, make a squirrel token, and this just sort of feels like
Chatter of the Squirrel is
Chatter
the
of the
one that I was
Squirrel.
thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, the
Mm-hmm.
Chatter of the Squirrel. That's it. And then yeah, this just feels like a very like spiky card, if that makes sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's just
Mm-hmm.
a it just does a lot for cheap in a way that's attractive but not backbreaking. It
And specifically having the Odyssey symbol, I think is very fun because this is a twist on some Odyssey mechanics. You know, hypothetically, this could have been printed back in the day.
Also, oh my god, please people credit your artists. I'm gonna poke Wobbles just in case they're around to see if we can get a live art credit. But yeah, in general, please
Hmm.
guys, I just noticed because I was looking at this art, I'm like, it
Mhm.
looks a little pixelated. Is it zoomed in or is this an existing Magic card art or something? But yeah, sorry, I cut you off. What were you gonna
Yeah,
say?
this had been on my my short list, but I'm like, "Ah, no artist credit, alas and alack." What's the next card for me to read while you
Yes,
wobble?
let's look at. I forgot the name. So I'm just yeah, Shake the World, designed by Gateways Seven, who
Ooh,
uh,
sure.
I'm using the art of this in the thumbnail, and I also used the
Mm-hmm.
art on Gateways' card for my previous video, but then I didn't include their card in the video. Uh, so
Mm-hmm.
I got you today, Gateways. I got you today. Um, and this is a very simple.
Shake the World is
Oh yeah, go ahead, read it.
one green, green, green. Is that right? Cryptic command, but green. You know, uh, for an enchantment with whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. Whenever you tap an elf for mana, add an additional green, green. So it mana flares all your forests and it double mana flares all of your mana elves. And if you can figure out a way to get a good forest elf, then I guess this Black Lotus is them or Lotus is them. Maybe not the Black Lotus because it's not sacrificing. Just more generic lotusy material.
Yeah, and it's just yeah. This just feels like a very like very like green concept in terms of like we've had like mana reflection or like Mirari's Wake before, and this is like a pushed version of that, which leans into okay, you need to be in mono green, um, both in mana cost and only doubling your forests. I guess it's also very Nissa Shakes the World, right? Because I believe she also has a forest mana doubler. Um, but then has the additional knob on top of hey, if you're using elf mana dorks, this goes crazy. This feels again like a very, very, very cube design to me. It's at a pushed rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's but it encourages like a really specific archetype, and you can really tune what elves you have. Um, yeah, it just feels like pushed, explosive, and build aroundable in a way that really screams like, oh yeah, this is a cube card for sure.
It
And
makes me think of Agnes Cube. I don't know that um, that cube has the elf density in particular, but maybe something very adjacent to that, either a very similar cube or just add an elf sub theme into something. It I totally think you're right. This is a very cube-ish card.
yeah, especially
And
if you want to support like an elf
it's
ball theme. Yeah,
it's very it's very fourish.
it is very. Mm, yeah. Yeah, actually, you said it was a Lotus earlier, and Lotuses add 3 mana, and therefore it is
Mhm.
not fourish. Uh,
But it's a four
no,
mana
no,
card that goes
no,
into a cube.
no!
And what is a cube but a bunch of fours put together?
Mhm. you, you got me there.
The thing everyone says about Magic the Gathering cube draft, it's all about the fours.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a perfect, idea of a geometric cube. Those two things are definitely connected.
Speaking of things that are definitely usually connected, let's move to Heart of the Woods, which is designed by
Mm.
Arshig. It's another triple green enchantment, though it doesn't have the four this time. Uh, and it's whenever you cast a green instant or sorcery spell, you may put 2+1/+1 counters on target force you control. If you do, it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. And feels like, again, it's a completely mono green payoff in multiple ways, but green is usually creatures, then permanents, then lands, then, oh, you're telling me there's other card types? And this is taking those forgotten card types for green and really putting them to the forefront as, yeah, you're building around a spell slingery type thing going on. Which,
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen a lot of mono green instant and sorcery sort of setups. And this to me makes me want to chain some regrowth effects, figure out some way to do you're getting cards from your graveyard and you're just doing these two instants and sorceries back and forth, and just spending all your mana each turn, because you can. It's still a forest, right? So you can just keep piling the counters on. Something like that could be fun.
yeah, I wonder if this would be still fine if it didn't have the green instant for sorcery, so you could do like I think it would be more fun without the forcing you to play green spells. It already puts a heavy like requirement on your mana base, both in
Hmm.
being triple green and requiring you to like have forests to put the counters on, so it can't just be like untyped non-basics that you're fixing with. So yeah, I think that just let this spread its wings and be a general spell slinger payoff. Um,
I
I think
might go the other direction and soften the mana cost, but keep the text box the same. Possibly.
that also works. Yeah. I think I've
Either way, an
oh,
exciting and novel card, I think.
yeah, without being novel length, which is pretty cool. I do like because again, it feels like everything simple under the sun has been done, and as we've seen from multiple cards today, that is just not the case. There's still so much, not just simple design space, but both simple and splashy design space available.
Isn't that just the joy and the spirit of Moxtober?
Yeah. And speaking of, I think, simple and splashy design, my last card for the day is Druidic Pariah by Leet Wizard. Um, and it is a 4. It is 2 green and a white for a creature elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, you choose an artifact, creature, or enchantment an opponent controls. For as long as Druidic Pariah remains on the battlefield, gain control of that permanent, and it's a colorless forest land. So it's a weird O-ring that also ramps you is what, or maybe not O-ring, but like yeah, it's a weird like half O-ring, half Banisher Priest, third ramp that is pretty intuitive to I think pick up on and like understand what it's doing, but feels like it would be a really solid role player in like slower decks, right? Where you get to nab like their biggest attacking creature and potentially ramp into a 6 or 7 drop next turn.
Mm. Hmm. I believe at least the way I would know this effect is Song of the Dryads. The 2 and a green enchanted permanent is a colorless forest land and like loses its
Yeah,
other
yeah.
types and everything.
That's the what
I
do you call
so
it? Classic commander staple. Yeah.
one of those like, well, this color gets this effect now. I I do think white is a useful addition here. It is funny to like gain control of a permanent in green white, but if you're going to gain control of a permanent in green white, this seems like a good way to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like it's gaining control sort of like it's gaining control in large quotation marks, right? Because you're not actually getting to I guess it doesn't lose abilities. Oh no, it loses. No, sorry, it becomes a colorless forest land, and in the reminder text, yeah, it loses all their types of abilities. So yeah, it's you're gaining control of it technically, but in reality, it isn't like what you usually consider gaining control.
Hmm. It makes me think a lot of the Whispering Forest. Um, episode 22 of Welcome to Night Vale. Uh, the one where it's about the forest, like saying, "Hey, come join me. Hey, come join me. Don't worry. Just come join me. It'll be good."
Yeah, there is something like incredibly. And this is definitely something I wish like a few more cards leaned into. Uh, Something so compelling about like ooh, like things that are not so like nature. Like because there's so much of a thing of like humans sometimes are like, man, society and stuff sucks, and I would love to like just return to nature and live in the woods. In the woods, but the idea of the woods being like, yes, yes, come, return to us, like, the,
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's like interesting stuff that can
Here,
be done with
I'll read the
horror.
quote.
Yeah,
The
hey,
Whispering Forest is a place where we can all plunge our feet and hands into the cool, soft soil, allowing our fingers and toes to grow and spiral into the earth, quickly and deeply intertwining with themselves, each other, snaking in and through snaking in and through complex organic network to become one. In the Whispering Forest, everyone is one. Everything.
oh yeah, it also has that like, see, like actually returning to nature brings you can actually give you a sense of connection. It's like a very
Mhm,
like hive mind culty type of thing, which
mhm.
or at least that's how like in traditional like creepy horror stories that's how it's presented. So yeah.
And I think the idea of like this is, very druidic, but a pariah because we really try not to do the thing where we enchant people into being trees. like hey, listen, we try not to do this, right? Um, maybe that's the reason for the pariah nature of this particular elf.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
Mhm. This is perfectly forest for me.
4 forests out of 4.
Mhm.
But
And
yeah,
so when you are hearing this, when you are watching this, it is quite possible that you'll have enough time to submit a card for play, and tomorrow will be gnarled. But is tomorrow also return? I'm trying to sequence, what they'll be getting next in their video feed.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, I think that it's gonna be yeah. We'll see. I think it's gonna be the day after you see
This
this.
video series will return
Yeah,
in some form.
will return in some form for day 7. Return. Um, if you want to, no, I can't. I can't keep doing this. If again, if you want to submit your cards for that potentially, instructions for that in the description. MSC file for all the cards we talked about is in the description. All the prompts are in the description. If you're watching this, you know the drill. Also, again, if you want to co-host a future episode like my amazing co-host here, Juliet, just DM me on Discord. It's KAYIU102. Yeah.
And you can find me at Folly on co-host.
But yeah, until next time, this is Caillou signing off.